Went back that Thursday because I forgot my charger. That's it. That's the whole reason I was even there. I had a work call at 4 and my laptop was down to 11% and I figured I'd run home, grab it, be back at the coffee shop before anyone noticed I was gone. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. It was my aunt's house. I'd been staying there for 3 months. I didn't think I needed to announce myself. I wish I had. I wish I had texted. I wish I'd texted. I wish I'd called. I wish I'd just bought a new charger at the drugstore down the street and never walked through that door. But I didn't. I turned my key in the lock, pushed the door open, and the first thing I heard was my cousin. She wasn't talking. She wasn't laughing. She was crying. And it wasn't the kind of crying that sounds like sadness. It was the kind that sounds like sadness. It was the kind that sounds like fear. High and tight and cut off, like she was trying to make herself small enough to disappear. It was coming from down the hall. From his room. I stood in the doorway for maybe 3 seconds. Maybe less. I don't actually know. Time does something strange in moments like that. It stretches and compresses at the same time, and later you can't account for any of it. What I can tell you is that by the time I registered what I was hearing, I was already moving. My cousin was 17. She'd been 17 for 6 weeks. I need you to understand what she was like before any of this. Because when you hear a story like this, it's easy to flatten people into their worst moments. And she deserves more than that. She was the kind of kid who kept a running list of every book she wanted to read, color-coded by genre, updated obsessively in a little spiral notebook she kept in her back pocket. She made playlists for everything. Morning playlists? Rainy day playlists. She made one once, specifically for when you're waiting for something important to happen, and I still have it in my phone. She was funny in that quiet way where the joke lands a full beat after she says it and then you can't stop laughing. She was 17 and she was sharp and kind. And she had this way of looking at you like she was actually listening to every word, not just waiting for her turn to talk. I had come to stay with my aunt 3 months ago when my apartment lease ended and I was between places. My aunt had the space. She'd offered. I was going to stay 2 months max, save some money, figure out next steps. My cousin and I had grown close in that time, closer than we'd ever been growing up, with the age gap between us. She started knocking on my door at night just to talk, about college, about her friends, about some boy in her chemistry class who she wasn't sure she liked or just liked the idea of. She seemed okay. I kept telling myself she seemed okay. There were things I noticed, though. Small things that I kept filing away without knowing why. She stopped eating breakfast with us in the mornings. Started going straight to school without saying much. I figured it was a teenage mood, the kind that passes. She flinched once when my aunt's boyfriend came into the kitchen while we were doing dishes. Just a small, quick thing. I almost missed it. I told myself I had missed it. He had moved in 4 months before I arrived. My aunt had been dating him for about a year. I didn't know him well. He was polite in the way some people are polite, just enough to cover something, not enough to feel warm. My aunt loved him. Or she said she did. She said he was steady. She said she needed steady after everything she'd been through. I didn't say anything about the flinch. I didn't say anything about the breakfasts. I kept filing things away and I kept telling myself I was probably reading too much into it. I think about that a lot now, the filing away, the telling myself the door was locked. I don't know what I expected, but I stood in that hallway and I knocked and I said her name and there was a pause, this horrible, hollow pause, and then he said, from behind the door, calm as anything, "She's fine. She just tripped. She just tripped." She was in his room. The door was locked, and he told me through the door that she had tripped. I said her name again, louder this time. "I'm okay." Her voice. Small. Wrong. She did not sound okay. She sounded like someone reading from a script they'd been handed 30 seconds ago, still trying to remember the words. I took a step back from the door. My heart was doing something I didn't have a name for yet. Not panic. Panic is loud. This was quieter, colder. This was the feeling of knowing something you don't want to know and not being able to unknow it. I called 911. I walked back to the kitchen, out of the hallway, and I dialed and I told them the address and I told them what I'd heard and I told them the door was locked and my 17-year-old cousin was inside with a grown man and something was wrong. The woman on the line asked me to stay calm. I was calm. I think that's the part that scared me most. How calm I was. Like something in me had already understood the situation and moved past the part where you panic and into the part where you act. My aunt came home 20 minutes after I made the call. She walked in to find me in the kitchen, two officers in the hallway, and her boyfriend standing in the living room with his arms crossed, telling anyone who would listen that this was a misunderstanding. My aunt looked at me like I had done something terrible. "What did you do?" she said. Not to him, to me. That was the first thing she said. I want to tell you about my aunt the way I want to tell you about my cousin, with the full picture, not just this moment. She had raised my cousin mostly alone after her first marriage ended badly. She had worked two jobs for years. She had held things together through circumstances that would have broken most people, and she had held them together quietly, without asking for recognition. She was strong in the way that people who have had to be strong get strong, not always gracefully, but genuinely. I had admired her my whole life. I don't know what happened to her in that relationship. I don't know if she knew what was happening and couldn't face it, or if she genuinely didn't see it, or if she saw it and decided that losing him felt like more than she could survive. I've spent a lot of time sitting with that question, and I don't have an answer. What I know is what she did. She told the officers it was a misunderstanding. She said her daughter was emotional lately, going through a hard time, that there was nothing to worry about. She said I had overreacted. She didn't look at my cousin while she said any of it. My cousin stood next to the female officer. Her shirt was wrinkled. Her eyes were dry in the way that eyes go dry when the crying is finished, not when the reason for it is gone. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was looking at the floor, at a specific spot on the floor, like if she stared at it hard enough she could step through it and disappear. The officer asked my cousin directly if she was okay. My cousin said yes. The officer asked if she needed to speak with someone privately. My cousin looked up then. Just for a second. Just long enough to look at her mother. Then she looked back at the floor and said no. I understood in that moment something I had not understood before. My cousin wasn't protecting him. She was protecting the only parent she had, who was standing in the room making it very clear, without a word, what the correct answer was. The officers left. They took my information. They told me that without my cousin's cooperation, there wasn't much they could do in that moment, but that I could file a report, and they encouraged me to. He had not left the living room the entire time. He watched all of it with his arms still crossed and this expression on his face that I can only describe as patient, like he had done this before, like he knew how it ended. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked at my phone, 12% battery now, and I thought about a lot of things. I thought about my cousin's playlists, about her notebook, about the way she'd stopped coming to breakfast. I thought about the flinch. I thought about the fact that I had filed that flinch away and told myself it was nothing and went back to whatever I was doing. I thought about how many times someone had done the same thing to something they noticed about me over the years and how it felt to be on the other end of that. I didn't sleep that night. I filed the report the next morning. I also called my mother. And then I called my cousin's school counselor, who I had found in my cousin's orientation packet that was still sitting on the kitchen counter from the fall. My aunt did not speak to me for 4 days. He was still in the house. I avoided the common spaces. I ate in my room. I charged my laptop. I showed up to my work calls and said the right words and felt like I was operating behind glass. On the 5th day, my cousin knocked on my door at 11 at night. She came in and sat on the floor with her back against the bed frame, same spot she always sat, and she pulled her knees to her chest and she didn't say anything for a long time. I waited. I had gotten good at waiting. It started in September, she said finally. She was quiet for another minute, then she said, I didn't think anyone would believe me. I believe you, I said. She nodded slowly, like she was hearing a sentence in a language she was still learning. It took another 2 weeks. Conversations with the school counselor, a second interview at a different location with a detective who specialized in these cases, where my cousin could talk without her mother present. A call to my cousin's father, who I had never met but who drove 6 hours when I explained the situation and who sat in a waiting room for 4 hours to be there when it was over. He got arrested on a Wednesday. My aunt called me from the driveway while I was at the coffee shop. Finally. Finally back at the coffee shop, and her voice was a texture I didn't recognize. Not grief exactly, not anger, something older than both. She said, "Why didn't she just tell me?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "She thought you'd choose him." Long silence. "I didn't," my aunt said. "No," I said. But she didn't know that yet. The trial was 8 months later. I drove back for it. My cousin's father was there. The school counselor submitted a statement. 3 other people came forward, one of them a woman from 2 relationships before my aunt, who had been sitting on her own silence for years because she thought no one would listen. My cousin sat in that courtroom, and she told the truth. The whole truth. Without looking at the floor this time, he was convicted, sentenced to 14 years. My aunt sat 3 rows behind me during sentencing. I don't know if she knew I was there. I don't know what she felt. I still don't know what to do with all the things I feel about her. The love and the fury and the grief for who she was before this, and the understanding that I will probably never fully understand. What I know is that my cousin stood up in that room and she said what happened, and the world did not fall apart. She had been so afraid that it would. She's 19 now. She takes classes at the community college near her dad's place. She still keeps the notebook. A new one, same color as the old one. She made a playlist a few months ago and sent it to me with no explanation. Just a link and a little note that said, "Thought of you." I listened to it on a Tuesday afternoon. It was called "When You Realize You're Going to Be Okay." I've listened to it probably 40 times since then. There are things I think about that I won't fully let myself think about. The months before September, all the other evenings she was in that house and I was in my room and I didn't know. The ways I could have paid closer attention. The flinch. I don't think guilt is useful. I've said that to myself enough times that I almost believe it. But I think paying attention is. I think learning to trust what you notice, even when a louder voice tells you you're probably wrong, I think that matters. I think it might be everything. I went back for a charger. I thought 1,000 times about what would have happened if my laptop had been at 40%, if I'd stopped at the drugstore, if I'd had a different call time, a different day. I try not to live in that place too long. The place where everything depends on one small decision and one small decision, and one small decision almost missed it all. But I stay there long enough to remember it. I stay there long enough to not forget what it felt like to hear her voice through that door. Small and wrong and following a script. And I stay there long enough to be glad, every time, without exception, that I didn't knock. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Thursday. Not in a dramatic way. Just quietly, the way you think about things when you're driving alone or waiting for coffee to brew and your mind goes somewhere you didn't tell it to go. What I keep coming back to is this. Every choice has a weight, not a punishment, not a reward, just a weight, and eventually that weight lands somewhere. He made choices, one after another, over months. Choices he thought were invisible. Choices he made inside a house where he had calculated, correctly, for a while, that no one would look too closely. That's not bad luck, that's a pattern. And patterns, if you follow them long enough, always arrive somewhere. My aunt made choices too. I don't say that with anger anymore, or not only with anger. She chose to believe the version of events that let her keep the life she had built. She chose, in that hallway, to look at me like I was the problem. And that choice, that specific, quiet, devastating choice, is what nearly cost my cousin everything, not the big dramatic moment, the small daily decision to not see. That's the part that stayed with me most. It wasn't one terrible event. It was an accumulation of small silences, his, hers, mine, for a few weeks, when I noticed things I didn't want to name. I think about the flinch, that 1 second in the kitchen. I think about how I filed it away because it was easier than sitting with what it might mean. And I think that the version of me who had kept filing things away, kept telling herself she was probably wrong, kept waiting for something more obvious. That version of me doesn't walk down that hallway. She orders a charger online and waits 3 days for shipping, and by then everything looks normal again and nothing ever changes. I don't say that to make myself the hero of this. I say it because I think we are all, constantly, making decisions about what we're willing to look at. And those decisions compound. They compound quietly and invisibly until suddenly they are the entire shape of someone's life. What I learned from my cousin isn't courage in the cinematic sense. She didn't get to be brave in the way movies show it, sword raised, voice steady. Her bravery looked like finally saying the words out loud in a room with a detective and her father sitting outside, when she had spent months convinced that no one would believe her, and that saying anything would cost her the one parent she had left. That is a different kind of bravery. Harder, more real, and what I learned about myself is simpler and harder at the same time. Trust what you notice. Your instincts are not overreacting. The discomfort you feel around a person who seems fine on paper is not nothing. The flinch is data. The silence that goes on too long is data. The changed behavior in someone you love. The skipped breakfasts, the hollow eyes, the voice that sounds like it's reading from a script. That's all data, and you are allowed to take it seriously. I went back for a charger. 11% battery. One small accidental decision. My cousin is 19 now. She makes playlists and reads books, and she is, slowly, learning to take up space in the world again. That happened because someone didn't look away at the last moment. Because someone trusted what they heard through a locked door and made a call. She deserved that. She deserved someone who paid attention. So does yours.